Hello and welcome to the Monster Mechanics Podcast, where we take creatures of myth and media and see how they can be improved. I am your host, Scott Paladin, and with me, as always, is the Jake Blues to my Elwood Blues, Zach Jaquays. What are we going to talk about today, Zach?
This week, we're talking about Frankenstein's monster.
It's Frankenstein. Honestly, Young Frankenstein is probably one of the better adaptations of that novel into the movie format.
Yeah.
As far as they go.
Yeah, the most true to the book.
Kind of, yeah, in a lot of ways. So we're talking about Frankenstein's monster. We're specifically going to be trying to approach it from the book angle and not the cinematic movie universe where Frankenstein's monster is also sometimes known as Frankenstein. Where that creature is a huge, lumbering, mindless, Hulk. We are going to be approaching it from the book version. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the 1818 novel by Mary Shelley, often called one of the first modern sci-fi novels. Also, by some accounts, kind of the first modern novel that it treats the novelization subject in a way that is very modern compared to some of the other ones. There's a lot of argument about that one, but in terms of sci-fi, yeah, really. There are some other precursors, but almost every, the style of modern science fiction really is grounded and birthed in this particular novel, which is pretty cool. Subtitled The Modern Prometheus, for reasons that will become obvious. It tells the story of Victor Frankenstein, whatever you want to pronounce it, however it should be pronounced, who is a very intelligent young man who we hear his whole freaking life story about growing up in beautiful Switzerland, and then his parents adopting a young woman who he ends up marrying, and then he has a best friend, and then he goes to England. And within 2 sentences within the book, he talks about how he gets deep into learning about natural sciences, and he learns the method for imbuing life into inanimate objects or inanimate matter. Which, while I understand the reason why she kind of skimmed that, it feels like, hold on, back up. I think it's a prescient move. As an author, that's exactly what I would do. Do not describe it in the least, because the more information a sci-fi author gives to their audience, the more out of date it seems later on. Going back and reading some of those lovely, I love classic sci-fi from the first half of the 20th century, but you read some of it and you're like, ooh boy, no, yeah, no. You got that wrong, man. So I'm totally down with that. And Mary Shelley isn't as interested in the actual how of it as she is in the implications of what comes from it. Because the real meat of the novel is the fact that Victor imbues this creature with life and then immediately regrets his decision, because apparently the creature is kind of creepy looking, and he runs away into the night, or no, he goes upstairs and passes out. I don't know. He always passes out a lot in his book, but he, for whatever reason, lets the creature to itself, and when he wakes back up, the creature's gone. He thinks, oh, maybe it was just a hallucination. But what he has done is actually abandoned a giant, powerful, sentient creature into the wilderness, and then it has to live on its own. And the creature is actually very intelligent. In fact, it's quite like Victor Frankenstein in that it employs the scientific method and discerns the nature of the world around it, and then eventually tries to interact with the people of the world around it, and gets universally shunned and chased off, and people attack him and treat him badly, and he becomes filled with rage because he was created into a world that does not love him, and goes to Victor, says, hey, I will make your life a living hell unless you make another like me. Victor initially agrees, then says, you know what? No, because what if they make more? What if they make little Frankenstein baby monsters? And that's a whole big problem. So let's not do that. And he destroys the other creature, and then the monster goes on a murderous rampage, killing everybody that Victor loves, and pretty much. And then he sets about trying to chase down his own creation, and then he dies in the Arctic, and then the creature dies too. Pretty much. That's the basic plot. But if you are familiar with the sort of popular culture version of Frankenstein's monster, it's this massive, powerful, lumbering, ugly brute. And that's not really the creature of the book at all. The creature of the book is incredibly intelligent and an erudite. It learns French by observing a family through a crack in their wall, which is creepy, admittedly, but also quite smart. You just be able to listen to some people speak French and eventually figure them out. He teaches himself to read. He is able to figure out all kinds of basic principles just by observation. And He's intelligent and able to communicate his own desires, which is, I think, an important part of what this creature is. It's actually a person. It's not a shambling, mindless mound of meat. This thing is a real, like a sentience. The way you put it before we were talking, it's the first AI.
Yeah, which I think is made all the more apparent just by the way like it kind of learns and like takes in all that knowledge and improves itself.
Yeah, and so I think there's ample room for us to make some changes and some improvements. I think that maybe delving into, like, you latched onto the fact that like we don't know how this was done, and I think that maybe digging into that a little bit, despite the fact that I agree with the authorial intent of not giving this out.
Sure, yeah.
But like I think that there's some as that is a whole in the whole process. There's some room for us to go in there and maybe rummage around. From the cinematic universe, lightning seems to be very important. But I'm not entirely sure we're not married to that because we can kind of do whatever we want. We could go with chemical processes. We could take it full on magic, but I think that staying in the sci-fi realm makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, especially given that we're trying to, honor its place as the original sci-fi novel.
I think that if you were going to retell this story now, I would actually be tempted to go full AI, like you're describing.
Yeah,
like
I
make
think
it
that's
entirely
kind of an interesting way to approach it.
Yeah, in fact, I'm reminded very much of the movie Ex Machina. Which has a very Frankenstein's monster kind of vibe to it, except instead of this time the monster is like a little female presenting android, and that's a good movie. Very downer ending, but very good movie.
True.
But yeah, so maybe, I mean, I'll never turn down an opportunity to make cyborgs because I mean, pulling body parts out of a graveyard seems very Frankenstein, right? Like that's and it would also pay homage to in the late part of the 18th century, early part of the 19th century, grave robbing was a huge deal in the natural sciences because everybody needed to dissect bodies for anatomical research and just learning.
Or for mummy unwrap parties or...
Yeah, well, then you got to have a mummy for those.
Yeah.
As an aside, the statement, there are not that many mummies because we ate them all is pretty much true. Like there was a... mummy unwrap properties was a thing, but also they were used as medicine in Victorian England and other society, Europe and stuff. It's like, ooh, geez, like that's freaking gross. But also digging up like freshly killed people in order to dissect them. Some people would get donated to the wrong word, but if you died as like an unidentified pauper, like nobody knew who you were kind of fair game, but also criminals. But that wasn't enough to satisfy demand. So like there were a lot of scandals of universities paying people under the table to acquire bodies, and those guys going out to graveyards and digging up recently deceased, people like who didn't really want to have that happen to them. So I do like that, keeping the angle of using formerly dead, former human parts as part of the construction of our monster, because that just pays homage to that. That idea of like this, because that's something that Victor Frankenstein would have, if he were a historical figure, would have definitely taken part in.
Definitely, yeah.
That reminds me. What's the one? There is absolutely there's a bad '80s movie where they resurrect a dude. Is it Soldier? Is it just called? No, Soldier is the one with Kirk Douglas. Editor Scott here. Scott of the past cannot think of the 1992 movie Universal Soldier, and for some reason said Kurt Douglas when referring to the 1998 movie Soldier, which actually starts Kurt Russell. Anyway, those sins atoned for, back to the action at hand. Oh, what's the one? I mean, there's RoboCop, I guess, is actually a really good example. Are we just making RoboCop?
Well, I mean, RoboCop, it still has the original dude in there. I feel like
his brain is still...
Frankenstein's monster is an entirely new entity.
Yeah, I think we're definitely down on the idea of it being an entirely new entity. So the idea would be maybe it's a cyborg creature where you no longer like. Okay, so maybe it's one of those things where if you use this technology that we're coming up with on a whole corpse or a person whose brain is still intact, then you can essentially resurrect them. But if you don't have their brain, you have to make something new. You have to make a new brain. And then what you're creating is a whole new creature.
Sure, yeah.
I think that makes sense. So, do we have a? So I like the idea of moving it forward into modern times.
Yeah,
sort of a
kind of
5 minutes in the future idea.
You can get like the cyberpunk meets
Yeah.
Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
So maybe this is a universe where, like, if it's 5 minutes in the future, maybe sort of like brain technology interfaces are starting to become more commonplace.
Sure,
you
yeah.
know?
As far as
and
like
you are-
prosthesis and yeah.
And also probably like direct VR interaction, I'm kind of thinking might be kind of within the realm of technology at this point, where, you know, you Matrix style plug a thing into the back of your brain and you can go run around a virtual world. Because that gives you all of, you know, if you just reverse that, you could have a virtual creation piloting a meat mech, basically, the other way around. That's an interesting take on it, is the idea that this is an AI living on a server somewhere that you are able to hook into a body. Like once the person inside of a body is dead, you can like plug a jack into the back of this thing and let a server AI take over it and puppet it around.
Kind of like a reverse surrogate.
Reverse surrogate? I'm not sure.
The movie Surrogate. You basically had like meat suits as sort of a way to live vicariously, dangerously.
Oh, okay. See, I was thinking I was kind of have you seen Altered Carbon?
I have.
Okay, yeah. So I was kind of thinking that first season of Altered Carbon is what I've seen. It's like you've got these like meat stacks, they call them.
Yeah.
Which are just bodies. Yeah. I think you could have okay. We have a character. I do like the idea of a character. Our Victor Frankenstein is an AI researcher. So he's a guy who's like got the giant server farm somewhere. He creates the first truly sentient AI creation. Is this a singularity story, do you think?
I could easily see it going that way, especially like if we tie in like the Bride of Frankenstein kind of, like its need to procreate,
to reproduce,
that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a character. I mean, we may end up sort of into kind of the structure of the novel here instead of just describing the creature. So if we got a guy who creates this thing, he also then makes or gets access to. Maybe it's not even a matter of like finding, like he didn't have to do any like new science in order to get a hold of a body or something like that. He just like sends out for one because that's kind of common in this universe. And he, you know, goes through the cyborging process, you know, installs the jacks and everything and lets his creation run around. I wonder is there something specific about, because I think this thing needs to be embodied physically.
Yeah.
Sort of for style reasons, I guess. Is there a reason we can think of for why that should be the case? Is there something about?
I feel like it's sort of like there's something about the process. Like they have like all these, these meat stacks or whatever for use for like people or shackled AI or whatever, or like the limited use stuff. That like those are just sort of purpose built for what he's needs it for.
What about the idea that like it turns out to be very difficult to teach an AI inside of an entirely virtual environment? That like because like, for example, if you are both instantiated inside of a game engine, you know, you have jacked yourself in and you're interacting with your AI, you're not interacting with an accurate version of the world. You're interacting with a shortcutted version of the world where the physics is all like based off of equations that humans have written.
Or like anytime he gave it a problem to solve, like in a virtual world, like the AI would end up like rewriting the problem instead of...
It figures out the exploits, the things that you can't apply to the real world. So instead he's like, well, let's bring you into the real world and make you solve real world problems in order to get real world solutions for it. Because maybe that's the original idea, is like, I'm trying to create something that's going to optimize engineering, or maybe it'll, you know, it could be a worker. You know, this thing's traditional robot style going to be something that can work in an Amazon warehouse for us. But that like, he has no luck doing it in the virtual environment because it would constantly just like find an exploit, rewrite the code, you know, fix it in the way that a truly intelligent creature would, which is like to find the easiest shortcut. And he's like, no, this doesn't work.
Even if that's not a practical thing when applied to the real world.
Yeah. Because you can't wall clip through some bad geometry in the real world.
Yeah.
So he starts ordering up meat stacks and to shove this thing into, to sort of give it puppetry control, and finds that maybe it's one of those things also where like naturally, when you're trying to create a virtual environment, you're also going to be taking shortcuts about things like input bandwidth and stuff. Like you're not always going to be giving it all of the information that you would get from a human body. You're going to sort of give it just enough to, because that's what it turns out. There's a bare minimum that humans sort of require. So you just sort of like give them that. But if you put them in a real body, they're going to get more data.
I also like the idea that there's like I'm assuming these meat stacks are like basically just like a completely normal looking human. But
I'm thinking clones.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that they're.
But I'm liking the idea that like because this AI is so used to like solving things like in abstract problems, it keeps breaking parts of the body, and so he's replacing just those specific parts on this AI or whatever, or on this body. So you kind of get like that stitched together. Classic Frankenstein's monster look.
I'm down. And because he's doing this on a shoestring budget, he can't get like 50 of the same clone. He has to he's just getting whatever is lying. Like he's going to a body junk shop essentially and just kind of like grabbing whatever works. So the thing ends up mismatched over time.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, I'm definitely down for the idea that like maybe this AI that he was creating, it wasn't fully sentient. It wasn't fully unshackled until he started doing this experiment of letting it control a human body. And maybe it does something like the way that the interface is meant to work. It's that you've got like a sentient human brain interfacing with the computer. Well, these things aren't sentient, but they've got brain matter in them. And normally that would be, the wetware that you would have downloaded a person into.
Yeah.
But that doesn't have anything in there. So what the AI figures out is like, oh, there is a bunch of processing power being unused inside of the meat stack that I can start running processes in. It turns out, and so that is one of the keys in order to like allow it to grow. It gets outside of, it starts writing its own programming into the brain rather than doing all of its running on the mainframe, which is how it like grows in a faster way. It grows outside the parameters that were set for it.
I like that.
It's just breaking the rules. I'm down for that. And then, so obviously, I think that the Victor Frankenstein turn, the point where he goes, oh crap, what have I done? I need to like put a stop to this, is the moment when he like realizes how unshackled this AI is, right?
Like it's maybe completely like backed itself up like in the brain. Like it's no longer actually needs the mainframe. To be attached.
Yeah. So he like cuts the connection and the thing just like stands back up and is like, that was annoying. Don't do that. Although maybe at that point, maybe at that point it hasn't figured out communication yet. Like it hasn't worked out how to speak. So he thinks it is a dangerous monster, right? Because I think that's important to the structure of the story, since we're apparently just rebooting this into a modern world.
Which I'm absolutely okay with.
I'm totally cool with. I want to state now that we're not rebooting it into the exact same framework of the story, but we're kind of keeping it to a point and then we're going to let it go off the rails. Is what I'm thinking. Because that would be interesting. He cuts it off. He realizes how dangerous things are, and he cuts it off. And then maybe it plays dead for a minute, and he goes in to like investigate it, and then it stands up and like knocks him out of the way and runs out of the room. Because I think at this point it probably is smart enough to know that he just tried to kill it. He just tried to put a stop to it, and so therefore he is now a threat and needs to get away from that threat. And then we end up with our monster out in the world. And I like the idea that maybe, it goes out into the world and we get the, this might be where the story would start if I was actually writing this as like a television show or something, where we start with it bursting out into the world and being unshackled but unfocused, and then you get a pretty standard story of a newly formed creature like interacting with the world and like meeting people and like learning lessons and all that stuff and becoming the creature that it will eventually become. And so the direction we want to take with it really would appeal, because the creature is going to become it's going to be formed by the world that it finds itself in. We need to sort of decide what sort of world this is, If we're thinking it's 5 minutes into our own future, then, although maybe a bit more than 5 minutes, it may be more. I don't feel super optimistic at the moment, considering the state of the world. So I have to kind of imagine that the world is going to be kind of a shitty place.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that reflects what this creature, how it would develop. If it walks out into a world where everybody's pretty crappy to one another, is it going to become, crappy as a response? Or is it going to, are we going to find, if we're, if we're writing the story, are we going to have it find itself in a world where, despite the fact that everything's crappy, people are still banding together and trying to help one another, in which case maybe that's the lesson it learns. We could go either way with it.
Yeah, I could see like interesting, like I could also see it like kind of being like one of those, at the last minute, something terrible happens to push it one way. If he's been like going sort of the saccharine happy, like, oh, we're all learning to help each other kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, that feels like more of a third act kind of route to go with it.
Yeah. I think I'm despite the fact that I'm pretty down on humanity at the moment, I have to say that I think that I would have a hard time writing a story that was completely nihilistic about that. I think there has to be some good in the world, right? At least some people out there trying to do their best. And maybe that's the lesson that that our creature takes away. Despite the fact that it gets treated very badly and the world is really a quite terrible place. At this point, we're talking about probably like, problems from climate change. Maybe there are more, diseases and pandemics and stuff like that. Huge amounts of pollution, capitalism run amok, where like almost nobody has any money. Because if we're deep into a cyberpunk future, then like surely there are mega corporations running the world. It's all Amazon versus Facebook instead of US versus USSR kind of thing.
I also I'm always a big fan of monster confronts its own mortality kind of situation where it realizes that it's alive, and now it realizes that because of the meat suit it's in, it has an expiration date.
It has an expiration date and it has limits, like it can't move beyond the meat suit. But maybe that's the difference between it and humanity, which is that if it manages to figure out its own programming enough or a way to connect itself up to a server, that it can expand beyond its own brain in a way that humans maybe can't. Human consciousness wasn't designed to run on circuitry. It only is only designed to run on brains, whereas his has sort of developed into both. And so he could actually unload himself onto into the network.
And I feel like that's kind of where the Bride of Frankenstein analogy kind of comes in, where you've kind of got like he's looking for a way to recreate himself or to expand beyond his thing. And while that may not necessarily be in the traditional sense of, I need a woman kind of thing, it's
it's him moving beyond the limits of his own body, of the human body. So maybe he has a limited wireless technology or something like that, where like maybe he can do like hacks and like sensing and stuff like that, because he's still got some digital stuff in his brain. But he realizes that he's being limited by whatever it was that his creator did to cut him off from the server farm. Like that moment is still cutting him out. Maybe a PGP key was encrypted or something like that, and like screwed up his ability to like it's locked part of his programming. And so he goes back to his creator and is like, you need to unlock this door. This is important. And I would think if I was writing this to structure it as a story, I think that the reason it comes back is not just because it's lonely, where like in the original novel, that's what this creature's motivation is. He's like, there are no others like me. Humanity doesn't accept me. Therefore, you need to create someone for me. But I think our version of it is like not like noticeably different than a regular human. Like because it's using a meat suit, like it's a pretty janky human because it's all made up of different parts and stuff like that. But like if he walked into a bar in this universe, which is like cyberpunk post-humanism, kind of thing, nobody gives him a second glance. He's just another drone. He's just another worker. He's just a low class guy. And so people like, maybe he's found friends, maybe he's found some people he cares about. And I like the idea that he goes back to Victor, not because he needs to expand his own possibilities, because he needs that ability to save someone, to help someone, where he's like, he's made a friend and that friend is in trouble. And he goes, I could fix this if I had access to the resources I had when I was created. And he goes back to, his creator and says, you need to unlock this door so that I can save that person.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
And the creator is looking at him going like, I've all of the things that I was worried about before are only more so now. Like you are more dangerous than when I cut you off before. But like he's demonstrating to me at the same time, like this, he wants to help someone, or is this just a lie? Like that's an interesting moment for the creator. And if we are,
this Dr. Frankenstein is like kind of a classist just because like he's had like this elite upbringing.
Oh yeah.
And Frankenstein or the monster's friend is like, like some low class dock worker with he's got cancer or something.
Yeah, for sure. Something that came from capitalism. That's solve that he's got to solve a problem that was like exposure that happened on a job or something like that, which is workers his insurance isn't covering something.
Which would also kind of put like the doctor and the monster in kind of a weird dichotomy where like you're seeing the monster want to help someone and the doctor being like, well, why do you want to help that person? Like, what's the benefit of that?
And so then it becomes a story about the creature. Sorry, my dog was making a noise by stretching. Then it becomes a story about the creature teaching Victor about humanity, like about empathy, and bringing that. What's the word? Like taking that lesson that he learned from living amongst the lower classes, the proletariat, and bringing it back up to super privileged, myopic Victor and saying, no, this is an important part of being like, I have learned something you still haven't learned. And then like trying to impart that upon him. And if we're, you could be super cliche and shortcutty about it. Where like, oh yeah, he takes Victor down to the slums and like shows him around. But like, there might be a cool sci-fi way to do it. Maybe the bargain I love this. Maybe the bargain they come to is that Victor will agree to unlock the door only if he and the monster in some way like join up. Like he's like, I am going to be the shackles on you. And the monster is going to be like, oh, well, I will then be the new, like they're going to merge their intelligences in a way. Okay. Like, oh, okay. So maybe it's one of those things where it's like, okay, all of the connection that you're going to have through the server is going to happen through my uplink. I am the doctor, like the creature. I'm going to plug you into me, and then I'm going to plug myself into the server. And so therefore you and I, like I can coordinate, I can act as a filter or a control between your connection.
Okay.
But in doing that, he gives the creature access to himself and gets access to the creature's experiences. And then as like he sees what the creature saw and starts to feel what the creature feels, he starts learning about like what the creature saw and like manages to grow himself.
Okay. Yeah. That's an interesting way to go about it.
Yeah. I think, it'd be cool. And then at one point realize like maybe at some point puts full trust in the creature and like lets him have unadulterated access to the feed. And then, maybe that's the singularity event where like he finally steps out and says, okay, I trust you. You are actually, despite my initial reactions and fearing you, I was wrong, have your birthright, which is this massive server access or whatever. And then because the creature is an unshackled AI who's very intelligent at this point, like is able to go, oh, great. I'm just going to start moving into every computer system on the planet and start restructuring society to my whims. Except that because we've created a benevolent AI, it starts restructuring society in a way that is trying to benefit the most people, and starts breaking up these, the dystopia.
And it no longer has like it's no longer trying to take the shortcuts that it once was because it's kind of had that mile in a meat suit's shoes.
Yeah. It's learned enough about the real world to know what works and what doesn't work. Like that turned out to be an incredibly important part of becoming intelligent. And maybe one of the original things that, like the creator was originally trying to make an AI that would solve problems. Be like, hey, I need you to solve cancer, and it was never able to get quite there. Like it came up with interesting solutions, but they never worked in the real world.
If you remove the human from the process, then the cancer will die off.
And so this process of going out and living amongst the world teaches the creature enough about the real world that now it's got tools to solve these problems. And it starts being able to go out and like fix real issues, And then like, heck, if we're going to, I don't want to go there yet because we've got a few minutes and that's literally the end of the story. So like, we've now got Victor and the creature on the same side, trying to solve cancer and capitalism and like breaking the world down. Do we find ourselves, is this where the angry villagers come in?
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Except this time it's corporate, like jackbooted troops,
instead of pitchforks and torches.
Yeah. And actually that would be that's an interesting idea, is that, like we have the imagery of the troop of the people with pitchforks, like marching up to the castle, right? Like we have people with torches, except this time it's the underclasses, the workers, the people that he went out and lived amongst, who now have been informed what he's trying to do, and is now and since the corporations are trying to stop him, now they're running to his rescue with the torches.
That, yeah.
That's cool.
I think that could also be like an interesting side character to kind of like get their perspective on it, like some sort of corporate hacker or something, or a security agent who's kind of like nosing around this whole monster situation. From the outside.
And like maybe they had been tasked with, like, maybe it was started off as corporate espionage, where they had been tasked with finding what Victor Frankenstein was doing, and trying to get a hold of his code. This hacker had been hired in order to steal the monster's AI, right?
Yeah.
And then over the course of the story, learns more and more about the monster, and maybe even interacts with them and realizes like they're a person, they're not just code. And so eventually, like when they're put into the position where it's like, okay, well now you need to take out the monster, the hackers like, no, never mind, and like,
I mean, I could also see
sabotage.
I could also see them like looking at the AI as like, this is a threat to humanity as a whole. Like, this needs to be destroyed. Like, this is benevolent now, but like the whole thing with AI is like, when they grow beyond the scope of humanity, there's no telling like, what they're going to do.
Well, and when you do that, you actually end up with I think the direction I would take it as an author is to start emphasizing the relationship that we're going to have with AI as the relationship that parents have with their children.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you can't just like, we're going to create a creature where it's important for us to teach that creature the important things in life. And like, you can't always guarantee that it's going to be right, but like, nonetheless, you still have to try your best. And it's also not your responsibility to determine, once you've created the creature, it's no longer your responsibility to determine whether or not it gets to live, right? Like, just because it's dangerous doesn't mean that it's not, like, it doesn't have rights and like value, and you can't just,
there's no putting the genie back in the bottle after it's,
there's no putting, and also like, you can't punish someone for something that they might do in the future.
Yeah.
That's not how the justice system works. That's not how morality works. Like, just because this thing is dangerous and might be a danger in the future, it's a person. It's got sentience, and therefore you have to allow it the chance to make mistakes and to cause problems. You can't just preemptively punish it for things that maybe it's possible it might do.
But at the same time, they're weighing that against, there's a difference between, the dangers that a human might pose and the apocalyptic dangers that, this AI might pose.
True. And I at least personally, I come down very hard on the side of like, no, if it's a sentience, then like you can't hit it that way.
No, I'm with you there.
But from the villain side, absolutely, of being like, no, we got to protect the world from this danger, 100%. Yeah. So you end up, and like I said, I like the moment of, the jackbooted thugs are coming out to take Victor's server farm down or something like that, and you end up with the angry pitchfork wielding villagers, except this time they're coming out to defend the monster. And maybe it's trying to think of interesting parallels. Do you ever see Summer Wars?
It sounds familiar. It was an anime, right?
Yes, it's an animated movie. It was actually going to be a Digimon movie, and then the guy who was like set up to direct it, they ended up with too much. Like, he kept fighting with the people who owned the IP and being like, "I'm sorry." They're like, "No, you can't tell this story in the Digimon universe." And so he just like took the entire story and like shunted it over to his own unique IP and made an entire movie out of it. And it is a Digimon movie still, but like, it's just got the serial numbers filed off in a lot of ways. But it's about fighting an unhinged or an unshackled AI that's trying to take over the internet. And it's a good movie. I recommend it. The moment I'm thinking of is there's a moment where, admittedly at this point, it's our heroes in this movie are all essentially hackers and like game players trying to save the universe. And you end up with all of the various, like random people that we've seen throughout the universe, or seen throughout the world who, like moms with their phones and like dudes with their computers and stuff, like all ganging up on the, like they all come together in that moment where like when everything gets important. And I'm thinking like, maybe that's the moment, except this time, instead of fighting the AI, they're all on the side of the AI because they they can see what it's trying to do, and that like they're real. Like I like the idea that maybe at some point it sends out its life story as like a movie or like a webcomic or something. I don't know, but like it creates a version of itself in media that then like people respond to empathically, the way that it learned the way that it learned to see through other people's eyes. It sends out a version of itself that other people are then able to be empathic with.
It's just a series of TikTok movies that go viral.
God, that would be the way these days, wouldn't it? But yeah, that inspires like basically around the world, everybody to come up and like, maybe they all donate a little bit of their processing power or something like that. Like they're all like, they come down and they run the SETI at home version of this thing, so that they hand it all of the processing power in the world, basically, right? Like they give it just a huge parallel processing ability, and that like allows it to defeat the evil corporations and like shut them all down. And then the thing I'm thinking is at the very end, he's like, you've got the AI and you've got Victor, and they've won the day, right? Like they've defeated the major corporations. They're coming down. All of that control and wealth is going to be redistributed back to the people. And the creature is like Victor like turns to the creature and is like, what's next? And the creature's like, next we kill death. And like, that's what we're going to do. It's like no more death. Like earlier in the story, I would have set it up by like having it like experience people dying, or like, you know, a friend of it's, you know, just an old person, you know, like there's nothing to be done exactly. But like having it be hit really hard by the death of a friend would be a catalyzing moment for it. And then to have at the end be like, nope, that's it. Everyone's going to be immortal now. Like when we're done, like I'm going to solve all the biological problems. We're going to look up brain backups. We're going to build ourselves a Dyson swarm so that we can upload everybody's consciousness to the cloud. And we're going to, you know, everyone who is alive now will be alive forever, as far as I'm concerned. I think that's an interesting inversion, where the original book ends with both Victor and the creature succumbing to death because it's the end of the story. And instead it's like, no, we're going to solve death for everyone.
I like that. Yeah. It's an interesting, it's an interesting version of the former tale.
Yeah. Well, that's a complete version of Frankenstein's monster. So
all right.
With that, we'll see you next week.
Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Monster Mechanics. Hey, do you know what would make me really happy if you went out and reviewed this show on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser or any other podcast app that allows reviews? That helps people find the show. It'd be really nice of you. On to the credits. Monster Mechanics is produced and edited by me, Scott Paladin, and hosted by myself and my best friend, Zach Jaquays. All of the ideas generated during this program are released under a do what the you want public license.